what sort of other experiences have you had, Richard, regarding UFO sightings? Because you live in Wales and
I'm a weirdo. That's why you're trying to say. I have weird experiences.
No more than I, my friend. No more than I.
For me, it stems back to my childhood. There were stories like I can remember my father. He lived in Loughborough, and he saw the very famous one. It was back in the middle 1960s, and it was the cigar-shaped UFO. And he saw it for it lasted 25 minutes. It wasn't like a quick sort of glance. And I can remember him telling me that story, but there was a story in my family of my uncle, and he was very young, and he was playing in Penalta Pit. And he was with between 14 to 17 other kids his age, so they were all in sort of region of about 14, 15. And something came out of the pit. My uncle was obviously eyewitness to this sort of weird shaped. He said he couldn't really describe the shape. Came out of the pit. It hovered over the children. So obviously, as you can imagine, they screamed. This is back in the day. This is like the 1960s. There wasn't readily helicopters just flying around like there is now and stuff. And it followed the children across the pit, and they were screaming. And the villagers come out, and they saw this object hovering over the kids, and it shone a light on them. And my uncle, I asked my nan this, because I only heard my uncle's account, and it was going back about 8 years ago. I asked my nan about it, and I said, "Did you see that thing, man?" And she went, "Yeah," and she just so blasé about it. She was like, "Yeah, I saw it in the sky." I said, "How long was it there?" She said, "Oh, it was there ages." And I remember thinking, I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Yeah," and apparently it was there for, the whole village saw this thing. Police officers saw it. There was, other sort of academic people and, different backgrounds saw this thing. My uncle ran up the street and he was screaming, and he was carrying his bike, and he took my nan's front door off. And he was still trying to run up the stairs while the door was down, and he was still holding his bike. So it must have been a really scary experience, my uncle. I've heard, and it changed my uncle's life. He went right into the X-Files and everything you could sort of do, and he bought all the magazines, the UFO sighting magazines from around the world, because it changed his perception of reality. But my first one, I was driving down Mackin Mile. I was going out, we were going to Newport, and it was me and my friend Mike. If you're going towards Newport, there's a mound over on the right hand side in the distance, and this blue ball of light came down at an angle, stopped, and then came straight down behind the mound, and we were both looking directly at it. Even though I was driving, it caught my eye coming out of the sky. That was probably one of the first incidences I ever had of seeing something. Like, I couldn't explain this thing, and for years I thought, it must have been one of them lightning bolts, like a thunderbolt, a plasma ball. A couple of years later, I was with my friend Mike again, and we were sitting in my car, and we were just chatting, and something went through the clouds, and it just lit up the whole sky, and it was the same thing again, a blue ball. But the weirdest one, up until the one me and you saw on Power Station Hill, was I was woken up one morning at 3 o'clock, and I sat up in bed, and I looked out of the bedroom window, and the only way I can describe it, it looked like a large raindrop. There was colours and sort of like wisps of light coming off it. So I opened the window, and it was still there. And I stared at this thing, I think, for about 10 minutes, I think. And it just sort of glowed, and it hummed, and there was like fluorescent lights coming off it. And it just moved away down the valley towards sort of Nelson area. And it just sort of moved away and disappeared. And I just went back to bed. And I was thinking, Christ, that was weird. And the other one was me and Chris were working in Merthyr doing security. We were up in the Gurnos, and being security, the proper security guards we used to take it in turns to have a little kip, right? Because we were a team. So one would do the watch out and one would have a little 5 minutes, like, because we used to do like 18-hour shifts. They were long shifts. And I said, oh, I fancy must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, oh, I fancy a cigarette. Let's go out on our little, we had a little balcony. And me and Chris had come out, and there was 6 circles in the sky. And it was, and this is not an exaggeration, it was the size of Merthyr. It was as far as you could see in any direction, these ginormous circles of light. And there were 6 of them. And they were just in the sky, just sort of in the cloud cover. So you could just see the lights coming through the clouds. And I remember saying to Chris, look at that. That's pretty crazy. And Chris was like, yeah. And we sort of looked up at it. I finished my fag. We went back in the cabin. Well, I fell asleep sitting at the desk, and Chris had fell asleep in his chair. And we both, well, this is the weird thing, is we never did this ever. Right, one of us would always be awake. That's the rule, just in case, because it was a pretty rough sight we were looking after. And I can remember Chris jumping up and shouting at the top of his voice at me. And he went, Rich! And I was like, I woke up. I was like, whoa, what's going on? He said, what was that like? What was them lights? Like, it was really bizarre from the moment I finished my cigarette to that moment. I don't have any recollection of it, and Chris felt the same. So yeah, that's quite a weird one, that is.
When I was a kid, now I don't know if I actually had this experience or if this was like when you're a kid, you especially with me, I had quite a wild, vivid imagination ever since I was very young. Now I attribute a lot of this now to my connection with spirit and the different things that I've experienced over the course of the years. Now, I've always had a weird vibe from the mountains behind my house. I live exactly 24 doors away from the house I grew up in. And we'd always go up the mountains. And when I was younger, I used to take a dictaphone. And I would take it on adventures. I would record different things happening. And this was a day that we decided to go looking for the legend of the White Lady. And I suppose being about 14, it was my first sort of venture into the world of the paranormal. So where I live, there's like a lane and it goes up and then you go on to like a forestry road. And back in the 90s, it was thick, dense forestry. We were talking and sort of walking around through these trees, and we seen this clearing, and a friend of mine stopped, and the look on his face was quite profound. He said, I could see this being, and the other friend could see it, and I couldn't see it. We were there for a couple of minutes, and we both kind of freaked out. Came back to the house, and my mother was quite annoyed. And I said to my mother, well, what's the problem? And she said, Ja, you'd like been up our mountain for hours. And I was like, really? I thought we were only out for like an hour and a half or so. She said, Ja, you've been gone a good 4 hours. And I was like, oh, that's strange. And I don't remember how we got from that clearing to the road. I just remember being in the clearing and then being on the road. But I remember having like a flash, and this freaked me out because I actually saw the person about a week later. I remember actually sort of lying on this table and seeing this person like lying next to me. It looked like he was in a hospital or some shit. And it's the first time I've recounted this experience for quite some time, to be honest. After I came down, and my mother had given me the telling off, I checked the dictaphone. And just before we see the being, the dictaphone turns itself off. Now, I used to have 120-minute tapes. I don't know if anyone remembers them, but you had those chrome tapes that they were like really long. They're like an hour, but like you could put them on long play. But the dictaphone stops as if someone's knocked it off, but then it knocks back on when we're on the road, and we're all like, boys, did you see that? What the hell was that? We're all freaking out. And I said that I'd seen this image of this girl. And about 4 months later, we were doing the Christmas raffle for the Air Cadets, And we basically had to knock on doors in the neighbourhood, and we had to look around. We had to sort of just knock on the door, see if they wanted to buy a raffle ticket. And this girl answered the door, and I freaked out. So my friend sorted it out, and she actually won the raffle. So I had to go back there. And it freaked me out. But that's the only kind of, apart from the one that I've described that we had here back in 2013, where I saw the being in my bedroom. That's the only experience that I've had that's kind of remotely sort of like that sort of related. Did you enjoy the video? Then please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more paranormal content. I've been Jared Walters, he's been Richard Oliver, and thank you for joining us.